Hello, hello. This is Squatch Mom, aka Dana. Happy Halloween. It's a beautiful day out here in Colorado, and we are planning on going hiking in a little bit to our favorite place in what is a brand new to us truck. So we're really excited. So we're going to enjoy some sunshine in a bit. So, as I told you in my previous video, I have written a fiction story, and let me emphasize that it is fiction. It is based on some interesting things that happened in childhood. My brothers claimed they saw something in Albuquerque. I'm not really sure if it was a prank. Nobody really knows to this day. No one will really talk about it. But the police were called, and it may have been a prank gone wrong. I don't know. But I thought it would make an interesting story, so I took that and some other things that happened in childhood, and I kind of fused them all together and fictionalized everything. So this story is set in Granite Falls, Washington. We used to live in Kirkland, Washington, but I didn't feel like that was a good setting for this story. So that's where I set it. And just so you know, the places that I mention, now I know that there was a sighting at Granite Falls in 1977. I did research that. But the places that I mentioned in the mountains, I don't know. I did not research that. So, just a reminder that this is indeed fiction. And also, this is safe for your whole family. And yes, it's suspenseful, but it's not terribly frightening. And also, if you hear some barks, Caspian, who knows, he may be demanding some attention with throwing the ball and so forth. Alright, so here we go. Bigfoot Prank Gone Horribly Wrong by Dana Susan Beasley. A full moon on Halloween. When Sean realized that, he laughed, a twisted half-grin showing a row of metal from his braces. That would mean trick-or-treating near the woods of Granite Falls, Washington, a woods that ran for miles, untouched forest that stretched out seemingly forever and ever from the Burke's backyard. He and his brother Stephen had seen In Search of with Leonard Nimoy the previous spring. It featured the Patterson-Gimlin movie of Patty, the world's most famous Bigfoot. Intrigued, they started searching for the infamous monster just for fun, but had found nothing. No matter, anyway. Their brothers both believed it was an elaborate hoax. After all, their father was a rocket scientist who worked at Boeing, and he told his boys it was impossible. But still, what a chance! Sean could finally get his big brother Stephen back. Sean shuddered when he thought of last summer visiting grandparents in Wyoming. His grandpa Sylvester, Sil for short, he hated that name, took Sean and Stephen to the Bighorn Mountains where they searched for caves in one of the canyons. The story went that Grandpa Sil had gotten surprised by a blizzard one day hunting and found a cave to hole up in. It saved his life. But he never could find that canyon or cave again. The family searched every summer for it. They always joked it would be where the family would hide out if World War III broke out with the Soviets. Sean and Stephen had also just seen the movie Trog that spring. It had been a featured movie on Channel 11. Yes, it was a B movie, but hey, life in the 70s was full of B-rated monster movies. After all, they were big fans of Kolchak the Night Stalker. They ate up monster films like candy. They liked it better than the new Star Wars movie, which was all the rage with their friends. Sean and Stephen had seen it at the drive-in theater, but really they liked Star Trek and The Legend of Boggy Creek better. Oh, the thrills. They were thrill seekers after all. So that summer, as they were searching, Sean found a cave. He went in, flashlight scanning. He called out to his brother and grandfather. Nothing. Where were they? Okay, this is creepy, he thought to himself. And yuck! What was that smell? It was a cross between a skunk and a garbage can. Sean held back a gagging sensation in his throat. He scanned the flashlight back and forth against the walls of the cave. He thought he saw an opening toward the back and then almost dropped his flashlight. He gasped. Was that two eyes staring back at him? Red glowing eyes full of menace? Sean rubbed his own blurry eyes and looked again. Still there. He started to rub his eyes again when suddenly something hit him from the back, nearly pushing him to the ground. "Roar," he heard in a low, gruff voice behind him. Sean dropped the flashlight. The red eyes vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The horrible smell vanished too. "Beware the troglodyte," Sean heard a low voice speak menacingly as 2 hands grabbed his back. Sean leaped around, ready to hit this beast. "Wait, trogs weren't real. That's just a dumb movie. That's just Stephen, stooped over like a caveman and swinging his arms wildly." Sean could feel something wet oozing down his leg underneath his 501 button-up jeans. "Oh, I am so getting Stephen back," Sean said to himself as his brother laughed hysterically. So now it was almost Halloween, and it was going to be a full moon. A diabolical, scary plan began to form in Sean's mind. Halloween day came, and Sean was ready. Wolf costume, check. Sure, his friends would all have Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker costumes, but in the Burke household they did things differently. Of course, Sean had to copy his big brother, as Stephen was fascinated with wolves. Ever since hearing the Wolf Cry album on his grandparents' old stereo, Stephen was hooked. So a wolf costume it had to be, and Sean had to do what Stephen did, and their little sister Sally, being a precocious little girl, decided she would be Little Red Riding Hood. Pillowcase for treats, check. Flashlights, check. After dinner, Sean hurriedly put on his costume, his mask on the top of his head. Stephen was also putting on his costume. Every year they trick-or-treated together, so the plan was sure to succeed. Surely Sally would go with her mother, so he didn't worry. Their father was in California. Yet another test for Enterprise, the new space shuttle orbiter NASA was working on. He was at some Air Force base there. Sean couldn't remember, but he thought it was pretty cool that it was named after one of his favorite shows, Star Trek. He always loved those reruns. But something bothered him. What did Mom tell them yesterday? He couldn't remember. "Where are we going to go?" Sean asked, just to make sure his plan was going smoothly. "We're not," Stephen said, putting his wolf mask on. "I'm going with Brett and Trent." "But we always go trick-or-treating together. I thought we'd go to Alder Street. But we have to cross the Boyd brothers' house. You know they're bullies." Stephen raised his eyebrows underneath his mask. That street was particularly interesting because there was an abandoned Victorian house at the end, an old homestead that had been neglected for years upon years. Scary, but intriguing. "Okay, fine," Stephen said. "I wasn't going to meet them until later anyway." Phew, Sean finally remembered to breathe. What a relief. Just then their mother called up from the living room downstairs. Their split-level house was modern with 3 different floors and stairs everywhere. "Boys, you need to take Sally out trick-or-treating, remember? She wanted to go with her big brothers, the wolves." "Oh, Mom!" they both exclaimed together. "I told you this yesterday." The boys raced each other down the stairs. Everything to them was a competition, including who got to the living room first. Why, just a couple of years ago, Stephen broke his ankle and Sean broke his shoulder skiing. Oh, what a day that was for their mother. Their dad was furious. Sally stood defiantly in her Little Red Riding Hood costume, her blonde hair cascading in curls that tumbled out abundantly. Sally had the thickest hair ever. How she cried when her mom brushed it. "Here come the big bad wolves now," she said in her 4-year-old baby voice. "Okay, fine, cool," said Sean, rolling his eyes. "Let's go," said Stephen. "Be sure to keep a close eye on your sister. Bring her back in 2 hours. "Yes, Mom," both boys blurted out as they raced outside, each trying to be first while their little sister tried to keep up, but her short legs wouldn't let her. The boys headed toward Alder Street, careful to avoid the Boyd house. "Come on, Sally," Sean shouted, holding back harsh words. Of all times to be stuck with his little sister. After an hour or so of trick-or-treating on their way to the abandoned house, their pillowcases full and heavy, Sean wondered how he was going to pull this off. He had told his buddy Billy that they would be in the woods at 8 p.m. That was a little less than a half-hour away, and they had to take Sally back to their house. There was no way his plan would work if they backtracked all the way home. Then he saw Richard and his big sister Lila coming out from the house. From the next house he and Stephen were going to. Richard was from the same preschool class as Sally, and so they were good friends. Lila was in Sean's science class and frequently babysat Sally. Lila loved the outdoors and especially loved canoeing down the many rivers around their town. But their canoe had recently sprung a leak, so Lila was stuck babysitting all the time. If she could only get a break. "Hey, Lila, would you do me a huge favor? Please, I'll do anything," Sean called out to her, retreating back, her Princess Leia hair just about to fall down. Little Richard stalked ahead in a Luke Skywalker costume. Figures, thought Sean. Lila put her hand on her hips, bunching up her long white dress, her blue jeans showing underneath. Yeah, what do you want? It's going to cost you. Okay, Sean griped. What's your price? I get to come with you next time you go canoeing. And no kiddos. No offense, you two. The two little ones stuck up their tongues at Lila. They laughed. Fine, I'll ask my mom and dad. Good, so what do you want? Would you take my little sister home? We're not done yet. Stephen frowned. That doesn't sound right. That's not what Mom told us to do. Yes, Sean, cried Sally. I want to go with you. No, Sally. Mom said you need to go home. Do you want to get in trouble? Sean coaxed. Okay, fine. Lily took Sally by the hand, and the four of them started back down the street. I don't know, Sean, if that's a good idea, Stephen said disapprovingly, his eyes following the retreat of his sister, a soft look of fondness flickering in his blue irises. She'll be fine. Lily watches her all the time. Now, I have an idea. Here's a flashlight. Sean handed Stephen one of the two flashlights he had hidden under his costume. Let's sneak past the old Hackett place, and then we can see what we can find in the woods, searching by the moonlight. We can stash our bags of loot here. Wouldn't that be fun? I don't know, Sean. Sounds dangerous, and I told Brett and Trent I would meet them. Oh, come on, Sean replied. That's not for a while yet. Maybe we can find coyote tracks. Sure, there are no wolves, but close enough, right? Or maybe we'll find the big guy himself. Stephen shrugged his shoulders. Yeah, sure, Sean, he said. Like Bigfoot isn't a hoax or anything, he thought to himself. He then shrugged his shoulders. The truth was, and Sean knew it, that both boys were thrill-seekers. All that adrenaline rush gave such a feeling of living, even if there were no such thing as monsters in the woods. Besides, maybe what Spock says is true about Sasquatch, said Sean. After all, this is Washington. Oh, that's just a myth. Nobody's ever found any real evidence. You know what Dad says. Oh, we'll see, won't we? Replied Sean. In the meantime, we can be legend hunters. Come on. Sean hopped the old battered and tottering picket fence and started to creep past the old gray Victorian house, the shutters banging in a sudden gust of wind. They set the bags of candy on the porch. And then another sudden gust of wind happened. Stephen jumped and then stood rooted to the spot, reluctant to go on. What had Sean gotten him into? Come on, bro. What are you scared? Chicken? He was already at the back fence. Sean started to flap his arms like a chicken. Brock, Brock, Brock! Well, this just wouldn't do. Sean could not be proven to be more brave than Stephen. That wouldn't do for sure. In the moonlight that had just risen above Sean, a grin showed on his face. Of course, Sean knew his brother would come. After all, of course, Squatches did not exist. Now that wouldn't be logical at all. Stephen hopped the fence, glancing once in a while at the strange house to his right, the dark, shadowy windows staring down at him menacingly. Was that a dark shadow that stood in the attic window? Stephen jumped. That must be his imagination. Stephen quickly marched to Sean, flashlight scanning the woods. So now where? He asked, relieved that the old house was behind him. Let's just go the way we always go, through the woods to the other side on the trail that leads to 7-Eleven. Then it's a short walk over the field and through the woods again, and we'll be home and we can meet your friends. Stephen thought he heard a long creak noise behind him and then a twig snap. Was that the gate? He shivered. Did you hear that? asked Stephen. What? I heard nothing. And Sean didn't. He was too intent on his scheme. His bud Billy should be just about in place. Sean glanced at his Seiko watch he got for his birthday last August. Sean hoped that furry gorilla suit would work. He had spent every bit of his newspaper-wrapped money on it. Sean climbed under the barbed wire fence, his flashlight scanning ahead of him, though the full moon cast just enough light to see the forest floor. Funny, he didn't remember a teepee structure being there the last time they were in the woods. Stephen followed behind. Snap! A sound of a twig breaking behind him. What was that? Stephen turned around quickly, the flashlight piercing the woods. He thought he saw something red dash behind a tree. Wow, I must be losing it, Stephen thought to himself. He spun back around. Sean was several yards ahead of him. He doubled his pace, practically running. See anything? Said Sean, grinning to himself in the moonlight. This was going exactly as planned. Almost there. Strange, thought Stephen as he glanced to the right deep in the woods, scanning with his flashlight. How did those big branches get formed in an X shape? He didn't remember that either from the last time they came through there. And wait, was that a huge tree upside down, stuck in the ground? Look, Sean cried. He saw a slight impression in the dirt, shaped like a foot. What could that be? Stephen looked at it. Sure, Sean, that's just human. Snap, another sound like a twig behind him. Sean didn't notice, intent on what lay ahead. Well, let's keep going. There's the trail to the 7-Eleven ahead. We've come to the T. Let's take this shortcut. They plodded on, leaving the trail. A big set of huckleberry shrubs stood in their way, and they had to bushwhack through them. If they only had time to collect the huckleberries, how sweet they tasted after a frost. Ow, 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 ow! Branches were scraping Stephen's skin and tearing at his costume. Great, the huckleberries were probably staining it. One branch from a particularly tall shrub scratched his face, and he felt blood beginning to tickle his cheek. He swiped it away, dodging the next branch. Ooh! A long howl coming from the bush to the left of Stephen suddenly pierced the too silent night air. Stephen caught a glimpse of fur jumping and leaping to the ground in front of him. Stephen let out a scream, and the thing attacked. The thing and Stephen tumbled to the ground. Was it true after all? Could Dad be wrong? Was Leonard Nimoy right? Were there Sasquatches in the woods? Then, as Stephen wrestled with the thing on the ground, he heard Sean laughing. He pinned the furry thing, whatever it was, underneath him. Those wrestling lessons came in handy. Besides, the creature was not that big. By the moonlight, Stephen could now clearly see what lay sprawled and wriggling under him. Just a boy in a gorilla suit. Stephen yanked the mask off. Just Billy! And Sean laughing like crazy. Stephen started to get up. Okay, you've had your fun. I suppose it was Awoo! That came from behind them, where they had come from. That's enough, Sean. The joke's done. That wasn't me. Sean's eyes were wide open, wide as saucers, like the fancy china saucers their mom loved that she got from England. Billy scrambled to his feet. His eyes were wide, too. Awoo! Came the sound again, this time closer. What's that smell? Exclaimed Billy. They all scrunched up their noses. I smelled that once before, said Sean, remembering the cave last summer. Then more twigs breaking, and a flash of red, and the sound of little feet. Little Red Riding Hood appeared in the woods. It was Sally. She had followed them. That was what Stephen had heard. But then all three boys heard it. Heavy, quick footfalls crashing toward Sally. Run, Sally! Screamed Stephen. Run! Sally looked in horror behind her. A dark bipedal creature with black fur 3 to 4 inches long loomed behind her. It towered above her like a giant tree, but as wide as a redwood. All Stephen could glimpse was a muscular form covered in fur that stood at least 5 feet higher than his own father. A conical head, black leathery face, a smashed-in nose, red large menacing eyes, and a flash of a grin with wolf-like teeth. With fangs! Sean saw it clench its human-like hands on its long arms that hung below the knees, sharp claws contracting in and out. Sally! They all screamed together. The thing hurtled towards Sally at unbelievable speed, caught the little girl up like a football in his long arms, and dashed off to the right near the trail, deeper into the woods. It's taking her to the pirate caves, cried Sean. The pirate caves were deep in the woods. That is what the boys called it. They liked to play Treasure Island there, pretending they were fighting pirates. At least that is what they did when they were younger. All three boys dashed off in pursuit, their legs quaking. They had to find her. Mom is going to kill us, cried Sean. If that thing doesn't do so first, replied Billy grimly. They ran on, though they were shaking, and a heaviness seemed to slow down their aching limbs. After a few minutes, the cave rose before them. They all three came to a screeching halt, almost knocking one another over. Suddenly, they heard sirens back toward the street. Lots of police sirens. It was faint over the field, but they all could clearly hear. Your mom must have realized Sally didn't come home. Now you're in for it, Billy whispered. Yeah, Sally must have doubled back and followed us. She's sneaky like that, Stephen whispered back. Just then they heard Sally cry, I want my mommy, she screamed between heavy sobs. Then the three boys heard the oddest thing. It sounded like two monkeys chattering to one another, like they were having a conversation. A female voice talking to a male. The female sounded angry. Apparently, the two creatures were talking to each other back and forth. Incredible! I think they're arguing about Sally, said Sean, his eyes getting even wider. Yeah, probably over who eats her, whispered Billy. Shut up, both brothers whispered together harshly. But seriously, what are we going to do? Asked Sean, struggling to keep back tears. What had he done to his sister with his stupid prank? He never meant it to go this far. Stephen thought for a moment, his mind churning over scenarios and tactics. This was kind of like a strategy game, like the game Risk they played all the time, but with a life-or-death twist. Once again, he shuddered. We need to distract them and then run in and grab Sally. Sean gulped. Okay, I'll throw a rock over that way. He pointed to his left toward a grove of alder trees. And then Billy and I will keep throwing rocks until they leave the cave. If we have to, we'll run down the woods calling them. The police are bound to be searching the forest now. At least they might be in the field. You game, Billy? Yeah, sure, why not? Replied Billy. Sounds more fun than being the quarterback in football practice. He shuddered. These players were a little bigger and probably ran a lot faster. I'll run in and grab her and head towards home. Police will be there too. I hope so, anyway. The chatter got louder and angrier. It was now or never. Okay, now, said Sean. He and Billy grabbed a couple of stones and threw them at the alder grove. The chatter stopped. The big Sasquatch, the male, came out of the cave, sniffing the air. The boys threw more rocks. They held their noses, trying not to gag from the garbage and skunk smell that suddenly wafted out. "Awoo!" It roared. All the boys felt it in their chests. For a moment they were rooted to the spot. Sean shook himself. He threw more rocks. The Sasquatch started off toward the grove. Now! Sean cried. But that other Squatch is still in there, Stephen said. Not much choice, said Sean. He motioned to Billy. Then they both ran off down the woods. Come get me, you smelly rotten beast, Sean yelled. Well, that was accurate, he thought. The Sasquatch in long strides followed the sound of their voices. With a deep breath, Stephen ran as hard as he could to the cave. Flashlight in hand, he entered the dark mouth. Was he running into a trap where he would be the main course? A truly bizarre trick-or-treat. Sally, he called, I'm coming! To his amazement, the female Sasquatch was holding Sally gently, soft cooing noises coming out of her. The Sasquatch startled at Stephen running in and closed her long arms protectively around the little girl and started to growl. No, Mimi, he's my brother. He's coming to take me home. The female Sasquatch stopped, as if she understood. The Bigfoot that Sally called Mimi set her down gently. She looked at them as if to say, Run! Oh, thank you, Mimi. The little girl hugged the Bigfoot's leg, barely coming up to her knee. Stephen thought he saw a soft glint in her eye and a soft smile forming on her black, leathery lips. The Sasquatch then looked at Stephen, hard. He got the message. Take the little girl and run. She'd do the rest. So he did just that. He took Sally's hand and ran out of that cave and straight toward home. He could hear the boys yelling and screaming down a ways in the woods. He also heard the female come out of the cave and run toward the boys and the other Bigfoot. "Ah-woo!" she yelled. "Whoop! Whoop!" she called, and howled. That was definitely not a wolf's howl. Sally and Stephen fell to the ground, nearly doing somersaults as the howls bounced off their chests. They picked themselves up, the yells and howls Bigfoot made vibrating in every part of them. "She's going to put that big bully Bigfoot in his place," yelled Sally over their pounding feet on the forest floor. Sally's red cape flying out and Stephen's wolf costume tearing and ripping on the branches that got in their way. They ran and ran. They ran past the 7-Eleven, across the road, over the field, and started through the patch of woods. Their house was just beyond them. As they ran through the familiar forest, they could see flashlights penetrating the woods. Police were beginning to enter, the beams of light crisscrossing rapidly as they searched. Stephen could just see the back gate and the green split-level house ahead of him. "Here, officer!" Stephen yelled. "I got her!" A deputy came running up. "Take her! My brother and his friend are in the woods with the Sasquatch!" He pointed in the general direction. "It's chasing them!" The deputy lifted Sally in his arms. With his other hand he rubbed on the short blonde hairs of his crew cut. The light-tan khaki uniform fairly glowed in the moonlight. Stephen let out a breath of relief. "Please help!" cried Stephen. The deputy spun around. "Nelson, take this little girl to her mom. Bearden, come with me." The deputy handed the little girl over to Nelson, who turned around, running for the house, yelling, "I've got her!" "Now, where is your brother and this Sasquatch?" "Follow me," Stephen cried. He turned around and ran through the field, crossing the road where the 7-Eleven stood, and through the woods again. The Deputy Howard was the name on the badge Stephen glimpsed by the flashlight, and Deputy Bearden ran behind. In the distance, shouts were coming from deep in the woods. The full moon peeked through the Douglas and ponderosa pines, casting eerie shadows behind the tree trunks. Or so it seemed to Stephen. But he kept running, and so did the deputies. "Ooh!" they heard. "What was that?" cried Deputy Howard. "I felt that in my chest." "I don't know, sir. That was no bear. I know that," said Deputy Bearden. Another higher-pitched cry came. "Awoo! Whoop! Whoop!" "That was Mimi," said Stephen, straining his ears to hear his brother, while shining his flashlight in front of his feet so as not to fall. "What?" yelled Deputy Howard above the eerie calls, ahead of them now. "That's what Sally called the female Squatch. I think she's trying to help." They ran on, then they heard it. 2 boys screaming in the woods, their cries ringing with fear. Stephen hurtled forward. He shined his flashlight further. There they were, not 50 yards in front of him. Sean and Billy were being showered by a storm of rocks. They were dodging and screaming, their arms crossed protectively in front of their faces. At the same time, a rotten stench filled the air. Then Stephen saw it. The male Bigfoot was throwing rocks at the 2 boys, screaming, his red eyes ablaze with malice. Great! He had got right in the middle of the war. He, too, as well as the deputies, had to do a dance to dodge the hurtling rocks. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he glimpsed the smaller Sasquatch, Mimi, as Sally called her, hurtle into the male. They both tumbled to the ground, rolling as one, teeth-grabbing fur, snarling and grunting and growling. "Come on, Sean! Billy, let's go!" The boys ran over to Stephen and the deputies. The deputies stood rooted in place, shock and disbelief on their faces. "Well, I'll be," said Deputy Bearden. "Boy, howdy. Of course I've heard stories, but—" "Yeah, and it's no exaggeration how bad they smell." Deputy Howard held back from gagging. Then Deputy Howard reached for his gun. The 2 Squatches were still rolling over and over again. The gun clicked. "No!" cried Sean. Just then the Sasquatches stopped fighting, realizing there was a bigger threat. "Run, Mimi!" cried Stephen. The male stood up, towering at least 4 feet above the fully grown men, his shoulders wider than Sally was tall. He roared. Deputy Howard pointed the gun at the creature, his hands shaking and his nose twitching from the rotten smell. A human-like face stared back at him. The eyes lost their menace. Only a sadness remained. The gun shook, as Howard's hand shook. The Bigfoot's nose was flat and pressed in, but otherwise so human-like with that dark, leathery face. "Don't shoot!" cried Stephen. Deputy Bearden chimed in. "Just back away, slowly. Everyone." The female Sasquatch pulled on the big Squatch's arm. "We don't want to hurt you," croaked Sean. A soul-searching look from the female Sasquatch to Sean penetrated deep, all the way to Sean's gut. It was only seconds, but it seemed like hours. "She won't let him hurt us." With that, the 2 Squatches seemed to melt in the woods. They were gone. An owl hooted in a tree above Sean. He jumped. They all heard a "Awoo!" as the Squatches loped farther and farther through the forest and up the Cascade Mountains. Were they heading toward Caleton Peak? The Burkes had hiked up Granite Mountain Trail last summer to Crystal Lake, a truly deep blue. Stephen thought his lungs would give out. They'd enjoyed driving the Mountain Loop Highway. Were the Squatches there the whole time? Stephen pondered all this as he heard continuing vocalizations bounce off the trees. "Okay, let's go back," said Deputy Howard in a shaken voice, cracking the words out. They all turned around and made their way through the woods, across the parking lot of the 7-Eleven and over the road, through the field, and at last to the woods again. Stephen thought that his legs would give out. Sean trembled. What would his mother say? Relief washed over Stephen as he saw his back gate and the house beyond. They all went through the gate and into the backyard. Their mother and Sally came running up to them, embracing Sean and Stephen. Billy stood by awkwardly, shuffling his feet. Gee, if only his parents cared so much. But they were too busy partying and carrying on. Billy cringed when he thought of all the smoke in the house. Ugh, it smelled just as bad as that Squatch. Someone had told him at school that his parents were leftover hippies, whatever that meant. Sean was crying. "I'm sorry, Mom. That was stupid of me. It was just a prank gone horribly wrong." "I was naughty," said Sally in her high-pitched baby voice. "I wanted to see what you were doing. Then that big bully caught me." "But what happened in the cave?" asked Stephen. "Mimi was nice. The big one wanted her to adopt me because she lost her own little girl. That's what Mimi told me." "What?" all the adults asked, startled, disbelief in their eyes. "She told me in her head. They can do that. She wasn't going to let that big bully kidnap me. She knew my mother would be sad, and there'd be trouble. That's why she helped." "I'm so glad," said their mother. She flung away stray tears with her shaking fingers. She'd heard a lot of strange things tonight, so maybe what her little girl said was true. "Well, they're far away now," said Sally. "Mimi told me they would go back to their home in the big mountains by the Blue Lake." Said Deputy Howard. "I wonder what that means." Stephen mouthed the word "wow" as he realized his guess was right. Maybe next summer they could go search again. But no, he wouldn't want to run into that big one. And would their dad believe them? What would he say when he got back from his trip? "Well, no matter. My clan is home, safe and sound." Sally's mom picked her up and held her tight. "By the way, boys, I am recommending you for a hero's reward. You were all very brave when you rescued Sally." Billy beamed. At least he would get the attention he craved. "Nah," said Sean. "Just careless, I guess. I don't deserve it. A Bigfoot prank definitely gone horribly wrong." "Hey, we left our bags by the old Victorian house." Everyone shrugged their shoulders and laughed. Just then, Brett and Trent ran up. Brett's brown hood flapped up and down, and the brown robe fluttered behind him. Of course, Brett had to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. Sean gasped when he saw Trent. He saw the brown fur and started to panic. Then he saw the Wookiee mask. Yikes, that looked too similar to the Squatch's. "Hey, Stephen, you ready?" said Brett, flashing his toy lightsaber. "We decided we're going to go look for Mothman. You coming?" Everyone laughed. "Nah," Stephen said. "One monster on a full moon on Halloween night is enough." And that is the end of my story. So, just a few notes about that. First of all, I got this idea about a month ago, and I didn't know then that full moons on Halloween is actually something very, very rare. And that the last one was in 1944, and I didn't even know there was going to be a full moon today on Halloween. So that's kind of funny. So it's definitely fiction. And the other thing is, I just want to assure you, I don't really hate Star Wars, but I do love Star Trek, and I do love everything monster, and probably tonight Sam and I will watch the Boggy Creek movie. We're so excited. So, anyway, have a safe Halloween, and have a good time, and I hope that you enjoyed the story. And by the way, if you enjoyed this story, I actually have published a book of fairy tales, and I'll put the link below. And also, when I read this to my nephew and the rest of my family, they really liked it. So my nephew said that I should actually publish this into a book, maybe another one of our, what we call our cycle of 12 for reluctant readers. I don't know that, but at some point I'm probably going to publish this and other stories. So be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you can find out when all these great things are coming. Okay, so now we are going to get ready for our afternoon hike. I don't think that we're planning on being there at night. That would probably just be a bit too much, but we are going to have a great time. You all stay safe, and I will see you next time. This is Squatch Mom. Have a squatch-tastic